Everyone, thank you for joining us. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. The republic for which it stands, we'll move on to adopt today's agenda. Motion has been moved. Anyone second?
Second.
And seconded. And passed. Next on the agenda is public comment. Up first, we have Courtney Elwell. Okay, next is Sierra Smith. Yeah, not present. So we have two comments. We'll move on to the reports. Up first, board reports. Everyone say?
I think you're getting Hispanic heritage. Plenty of cities there from the southern part of it, was great to see them. As the Hispanic heritage that is held in Salem, and so we perform kinds of official community members and community. Also, it's great to see the school. And what else? There's been other community events. Parents and other students there. It's been great to see.
Louder.
I couldn't hear Noemi, but I don't have much to report. It's just personal. My daughter has been applying for FAFSA and all the other recommended applications for scholarship. She's a senior this year, and that's all we've been doing, focusing on the on scholarships and her pathway. She just started yesterday going into the hospital. She's doing Willamette, the Willamette Promise project, and so she's going into nursing. So yesterday was her first day, so I'm very excited about the programs that we have as a CD, you know. So thank you. Sorry that I don't have much to report. Thank you.
Thank you. For me, yeah, a little bit on the personal side. Found out a while ago, but we shared with family and friends that we're expecting, my wife and I, Alma. This will be a second child. Excited, a little nervous because our little one, SP, is 2 right now. She just turned 2 last weekend. So we're trying to mentally prepare ourselves. But it's really exciting. Really fun. Being a girl dad is definitely a highlight. More community work. Like what Mia mentioned, it's Hispanic Heritage Month. It's a big month to celebrate, and just I think in our community we're able to do a lot of special things. I've been working on a panel to hear from Latinx students that are studying in architecture and engineering, and we're going to be doing that next week. So I've been contacting students and inviting people. PAU, the firm I work at, will be hosting the event, so, and I'll be facilitating. So it's really special to be able to be together in person. So hoping that, you know, we start this tradition where every year we do something special in that industry. That's all I have. And we'll move on to Office of the Superintendent report.
All right. Thank you, Chair. I'm going to invite to the first table. We've got Chrissy Cameron.
1 second.
Good evening, Chair Vela Moreno and school board members, Dr. Morlock. So I will be talking tonight, giving you a report on the Department of Teaching and Learning. And well, Rachel gets it pulled up. There are 3 different things that I'll be sharing with you tonight. 2 are around our materials adoption, so the language arts adoption that we went through last year, kind of where we are with the implementation of that this year. And then also the math adoption, which is what we are going through this year. And then I'll be also talking about our coaching model that we're using this year around co-teaching, which ties in with our adoption. So the first thing that I'd like to share with you is around the language arts adoption and where we are with implementing that. And so, thank you. Oh, this is the wrong. It's the other one.
Tag report.
We're in the tag.
Okay.
Oh, I thought you were telling me you were doing the.
No,
you
it's
were doing one first.
the
Oh,
tag report. I can go back.
sorry, I didn't.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Well, then I'd like to invite you know, to come and join me. Hello. So Suzanne is our district tag coordinator, and so I wanted her to come up and present with me tonight while we share with you about the tag program. So I apologize for the confusion. All right, so I wanted to start by just explaining what the Talented and Gifted program is and how students are identified for that. So I put the definition on the slide, and I'll just read it. I won't go through the entire thing, but it gives you the definition of it and the different ways that students can be identified for qualifying for tag. So talented and gifted children means those children who require special educational programs or services, or both, beyond those normally provided by the regular school program in order to realize their contributions to self and society and who demonstrate outstanding ability or potential in one or more of the following areas. So, and then we listed the different areas where students can qualify for tag services. In our district, I wanted to share some demographics with you. So we have 445 students who currently qualify for tag services in our district. And I just give you the breakdown for elementary, middle, and high. And you'll see the elementary is a little bit low right now. The reasoning for that is because some of the blanket screening has been disrupted the past few years during the pandemic. But Suzanne is making sure that we're getting all of those blanket screenings done. And a little bit, we'll talk about how we do the blanket screening. And then she's getting a lot of teacher referrals right now for identification, and she's been monitoring some of our interim assessment data to identify students who may qualify for tag. So the numbers for elementary will definitely start to creep up. And then I also broke it down by languages just so you can see the breakdown of students that qualify for tag services by their languages. So I wanted to connect our tag services to our strategic plan. And with this first part of the plan, thinking about that readiness piece and how we're getting students ready to pursue college and career options and success in life. And so within the tag program, when we think about readiness, we think about how we are identifying students for the tag program, and then how we have individual plans that support their individual needs that they have with regards to their qualifications. So on here, I put a we believe statement that comes directly from our tag manual. And so we believe that the talented and gifted student has unique needs and strengths, and therefore requires an education appropriate to his or her rate and level of learning in a proficiency-based context. So in order to identify students for tag, Suzanne now conducts annual screenings in 4th and 5th grade in the fall to look for students who might potentially qualify for tag. And then each year in the spring, 2nd grade students are go through a screening as well. And then, as I mentioned before, teachers can recommend students that they believe may qualify. And then Suzanne does some further testing or file reviews to determine if the student does qualify. And then each student has an individual plan that teachers help create. And so they indicate supports that they're providing in their classrooms because the majority of tag supports do happen within the classroom. And so she supports teachers to make sure that they're implementing those supports for students. And then these tag plans are then shared with families, ideally at parent-teacher conferences. If teachers can get them all done in time, it's kind of a short turnaround from the start of the school year. Or they're mailed home, and then conversations with teachers can happen at the convenience of for the parents. And then thinking about going back to the strategic plan and thinking about engagement and how we're engaging students within their individual plans. Suzanne's going to talk to you a little bit about what our services look like for students and how she really focuses on that engagement piece through the work that she's doing. And I'll pass it over to her.
Yeah, sure. And before I start on that, I would like to mention we're getting teacher referrals a lot. I've tested 5 students this week and it's only Tuesday. So of those, 2 definitely qualified, 2 are in process, and 1 did not. So I think that's very encouraging. We do weekly pull-out services for elementary school, and that looks like a different school every day. So on Monday it's Heritage, Tuesday it's Lincoln, Thursday is Nellie Muir, and Friday is Washington. If you're wondering how I picked it, it's alphabetical. The most fair thing to do. And we engage in a lot of different activities. We started the year out with geo. And the students, we learned about rocks and rock cycle and volcanoes and eruptions. And then for our ending activity, they got to break open a geode. And then to bring the fine arts into it, we made jewelry. And the students really enjoyed all of the activities. We have moved into the ocean, and the students expressed a great interest in sharks. So we are learning about sharks. And we saw a video of underwater dives and sharks and things last week. We're moving into talking about the structures of sharks and, for example, how their throat is and how that aids in their feeding and all sorts of different fun things. And the students are enjoying that a lot too. And we are using a math activity where the students use a grid to draw a shark accurately. So that brings some of the math into it. And at the end of the unit, they are going to be doing an activity where they identify the species a shark tooth came from. And then they get to take the tooth home and we'll make a necklace or a keychain or whatever they want out of it. So we're also doing before school math sessions for elementary students. I've started at 2 of the elementary schools because I've had computers there. And the other 2 elementary schools, we will be starting after math testing is over because there will be computers available at that time. And then, of course, our district also has the two-way bilingual immersion program. And I am happy to say that some of the TAG students in years past have learned a 3rd language. And that's something that students don't get in every district. So I'm really pleased with that. Oh, I do. And in fact, I'm at a different school every day for the morning, and then the afternoon is devoted to assessing student referrals from teachers. And so I travel around as needed for those and doing paperwork and take plans, all of those things. And let's see, in the upper grades, they have access to accelerated classes and opportunities for college classes. We continue our bilingual program. And then we also assist teachers to providing class support for students with a TAG plan, and we connect these students to school clubs. And right there on the screen is a picture. I'm the one with the hammer, of course, whacking a geode. And this was one of my tag groups when we were smashing rocks. So, and you can see in a couple people's hands for a necklace. Any questions? It depends. In middle school, sometimes you'll get a sixth grader that comes in, but they're not in sixth grade now. They're in eighth grade now. So they would go to an eighth grade math class, just as an example. In high school, we have students who can go to college classes.
I can maybe that one.
It depends on the student. There are, Clackamas Community College has an extension.
We also have like the Willamette Promise where students can get the college credit through the courses that they're taking with Woodburn teachers. And we have our AP classes and so there are some different pathways that students can take to get the college credit.
The number of elementary students, we sure that we're low at 81. What's the target?
Well, there isn't really a target, but it should be around 7% of the students. Around, that's not a firm, solid target because in any given year it's going to fluctuate. But we are picking up students already and it's only the beginning of the year, so I'm quite certain we get a few more. I've been analyzing the map results and I've got about 20 kids that aren't in tag who scored high enough. And all I need for them is the backup data, the work samples from class, because you cannot identify a student from just a single test. You need something to show that this isn't a fluke, but it doesn't have to be a second test. It can be their work samples. And so we'll be working on that, but I want all the map data in, which should be by next Monday. I should have all the results. I've already started looking at them. I don't know the percentage on them. But you can probably add about 20 to that because I know two of the ones I'm identifying. So far that brings us up to 83 and I've got two more that I hope they make it, which means 86. And then you got all those students that have taken math testing who are high enough. And I imagine if they did well on the test, they would probably have the faster.
I believe I've right around 2,000 in elementary, 2,000 students, so yeah, 7% of the 40.
Yeah. Once we start the blanket screening, which will be after math testing is over, because I don't want to overburden the students with too many tests at a given time, then we'll have some more.
For like the morning sessions, do we facilitate transportation or we rely on parents to?
Oh, there's nothing at school.
Oh, that's during. the school day.
Basically, for example, I'm at Washington School on Friday. So Washington, I open up a lab. I have computers for any student that comes in. I've got the capacity for about 25. And I hand the tickets to someone in the gym who's on duty. And they hand the ticket to any student that wants to come in. It doesn't have to be a tag student. And the students come in and they do a math activity. And the math activity is differentiated by grade level and by where they are. So they all start out with addition facts. But then as the tests go on, when they pass one, like they know all their addition facts, they move up to subtraction. My record, because I have been doing this at Washington for a very long time, I had a student pass 396 tests. By the time he was done, he was doing statistics and probability and calculus, and I could barely keep ahead of him. So he was really awesome. But I've had a lot of students get up to 80 or 90 targets, and that isn't unusual, so it just depends. Now, that was doing it every day of the week at one school. I won't get that many targets this year because I am only at each school one day. So on the day I'm at Melnier, Thursday, I started doing that group, and they come in with the same type of thing. It'll be a little bit slower, but it's still worth doing.
And what would you say is maybe better?
I think getting to know all the schools has been a challenge, but everybody has been very welcoming. And they have all been so supportive, and I think that's just kind of settling in. So I think once I'm settled in, it won't be a challenge anymore. I'm still finding myself looking at the map and thinking, oh my gosh, where's this? But really, it's going very smoothly. All the principals and the staff have been as nice as can be. Really wonderful.
Once a student is identified and in the tag program, they remain in the program until they graduate. Is there ever cases where they don't work?
No, they might not achieve, but that doesn't make them less smart. So what we try to do if somebody starts not achieving is find out what the problem is and then try to correct that. But you don't kick someone out of tag just because they suddenly aren't doing well. And you can have students with a learning disability who also happen to be tagged really smart. We have one student in the district who has a great deal of difficulty reading. That isn't how she was identified with reading. She was identified intellectually. So if you look at her classes, she will probably never be a shining star at reading and writing, but her problem-solving abilities are amazing. And so we try to focus on each tag student's strengths and try to direct them in a way that they can capitalize on that. But you really can't get kicked out of tag. You can be held out of a class, like a pull-out class by your teacher, if you've chosen not to do any work in your class for, 5 days in a row or something. But we try to work with the student and get them to see how important it is to be full the fun of coming to the pull-out class, but also doing their classwork.
Random question. I remember being in tag and getting some special treat. Do they still do it? Like cookies or juice?
Usually when I do a taste testing experiment, our superintendent was a victim of that from some of my lovely tag students. They badgered him into trying a slip of paper with a really bitter chemical on it.
I got to make a necklace. You should have gone on the day I would.
Apparently the wrong day. Thank you very much. Yeah.
So they do get to do experiments now. That experiment won't be done this year at Washington School because they've already done it. But I may do it at any of the other schools if anybody wants to come try a really tasty strip of paper.
I believe Chrissy would love to be out there.
Yeah. See if I can make it.
Any more questions?
Well, the tag plan is the first step because the parent meets with the teacher. Most of the tag services occur in the classroom. The pullout is nice and it's a great place for social interaction with tag kids with each other and very valuable because they're meeting their peers and that can be really helpful. But really, the core education happens in the classroom. So the parent and teacher working together to make sure that the child is getting their needs met. And parents can also contact me if they feel the child's needs aren't being met. And I would step in and we can brainstorm and try to figure out a way. Teachers also can come to me if they have a problem. I've already had some teachers this year saying, oh, I've got this kid who's in first grade who's way off the charts in math. What can I do? And we brainstorm and worked out a solution with computers. Some additional programs that she can use. So he's on board and just get them plans and he's engaged and he's well.
One of the things about, has it always been that way?
Yeah, it has. That's been pretty much the norm.
Good. Laura, did you have a question? No. All right, thank you.
We're gonna go to the long soil plan and we'll bring it back up. Is that okay?
Sorry.
All right.
How about that? I said I didn't want to find all.
That's all right. Next we have Karina Ruiz and Lisa Warner from architecture, who's been leading our work with long range facility plan. And we also have additional folks in the crowd who will be helping to do the presentation tonight. I'm excited. I'm just going to turn it over. There's lots to talk about and lots of questions. This is a very important piece of the long-term vision of the district and the kinds of things that we need to plan for at a time. We do it about once every 10 years, and it's a significant lift and a very critical part of the district's planning overall. So I'm excited to see where we are at the end. So thank you very much.
Good evening, and board members. Lieutenant Morlock, my name is Betty Brees, and I'm here with my colleague Lisa, as Dr. Morlock said. We're excited to share with you kind of the work that has been done by your community in building together kind of this long range facilities plan. We'll start by kind of telling you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Trying to get there.
I'll just kind of talk through it, kind of what the purpose is of the long range facilities plan, why you do it, what the process is. Talk about the main piece that I'm going to be talking about is kind of providing an overview of kind of an intentional approach that we took to getting stakeholder engagement, thinking about who we need to hear from and how we can go about getting that information. And then through that work and the analysis of that work, then the work that the long range facilities committee did to start to develop what are the guiding principles that should guide our work. How do we then take the data that you have in terms of the condition of your buildings, both in terms of physical condition, in terms of what we call educational adequacy that Elisa will define, looking at both your enrollment and your capacity information. And then there's a lot of detail in the report around kind of school-based summaries that, again, we'll kind of hit the highlights on today. And then look at what were the recommendations for a capital improvement plan. So that's kind of our approach to the meeting today. So we'll start by telling you a little bit about why we do a long range facilities plan. The goal is really to kind of think forward for the next 10 plus years, right? To really think about how do you bring your facilities in alignment with your educational vision, right? Both in terms of what you want to be able to accomplish educationally, but then also in aligning that with your capacity or your enrollment projections such that you're sure that your facilities can support where you're going in terms of your growth or your construction and also what you want to accomplish educationally, right? 10 years is about a good horizon because we know that anything beyond that, maybe even anything up to that is a bit of a stretch in terms of knowing where we're going to go. But it's also a requirement by the state of Oregon for any school district that is looking to receive any funding for facilities that you have an active and current long range facilities plan. So that what you see below there in terms of the state requirements are just some of the key pieces that they look to in a long range facilities plan to ensure that you're thinking about it in as holistic a way as possible, right? And so you'll see everything from, like I said, thinking about kind of what are your projections by school site, looking at do you have anything in terms of any school, grounds that maybe you want to either buy or you have surplus property. If you're in a fast growing time, really the majority of what we're trying to look at is how do you take what you and your community want to accomplish and allow your facilities to support that. That's really kind of the main thrust of that. So again, our long range facilities plan was developed through kind of a series of very intentional information gathering sessions that we brought together, right? So we decided very early on that in order to ensure that the work that we were doing was trying to not only meet the needs of the entire district, but similar to the program or the TAG program that was just presented, you also want to ensure that you are reaching audiences that are particularly impacted, right? In this case, we really focused on communities that have been most impacted by both educational and societal inequity.
to ensure that their voices were core to us identifying what are kind of the micro problems that we want to solve, right? Everything from how you get to school to what you encounter in school, what are potential obstacles to success, and then also what are ways in which you and your family have been successful, right? To try and build on both the positive and some of the challenges that you've had. So we held a series of meetings that I'll talk to you a little bit about. And then we also went through each of your facilities, walked them, got a good understanding of kind of what the conditions of those facilities were, did educational adequacy interviews, and then started to look at the projections that were provided by Davis Demographics, which hopefully you all recall the presentation that was given to you maybe a month ago. A couple months ago, and then aligning that with kind of the capacity, right? So those two always work well together. And if at any point in time anyone has a question, please stop me. So the next effort, and you can go ahead on to the next one, is to talk a little bit about the work, what we call listening and learning work that we did in the spring of this year. So we held 8 sessions with a variety of stakeholder groups in the district, your district parent advisory group, your DPAC. We tried to reach groups where they were already convening. That way we tried to get as many people to attend these as possible. So I facilitated your DPAC group in Spanish. We're able to get good feedback from those groups. We also went to your student voice committee, your site councils, both at the elementary school level, and then we combined secondary, so middle and high school site councils across all schools, right? So that wasn't just focused on one school. Also did interviews with your SPED program coordinator to really, your director of your special needs program, to be able to assess kids that what would best serve the needs of families in your SPED program. Also did the same thing with your newcomer families in your English language learner program. We did have 2 sessions that were scheduled, but no one attended, those two were your Russian language families and students experiencing disability. So that's why we took the second path and said, okay, then if we didn't get people, these were scheduled. Most of them were scheduled in the evening hours. We tried to do outreach to ensure that we were getting kind of as many people there as possible, but you're never able to get all of your target audiences. So we tried to still get the same input, but maybe from different places. So in a variety of ways, there were mailers that went, there were emails that went through, kind of targeted through school principals to identify particular communities. We also, I believe, looked at leveraging some of your community-based organizations and some of the parent advisory groups that you have to try and get the word out as much as possible. The site councils are easy because obviously those are existing audiences. Where we were trying to get to some of your larger audiences, like the one that we conducted in Spanish was easy because we had a target audience, right? So with your DPAC group. But for example, your Russian language session, that was again trying to, it was all translated into Russian. Same thing with the Spanish sessions were translated into Spanish. And then we kind of put that out into community to try to generate as much interest as possible. Some of these were in person, some of them were online. So try to provide as many opportunities for people to provide input as possible.
For students with families who are looking for students with disabilities and their families, they contacted us. Working through, the principal at Heritage was helped us serve as a point of contact in reaching out to Russian families, and then the SPED administrator, Sonia, I believe, was the one I think that was helping with that. Yeah, it was fun.
It was Dana, but that's okay.
Sorry.
So that's okay. Sonia was helping you because you're the title with the Deepak.
Okay.
Yep. It's all right. We've got Dana here too.
Any other questions? Did we get a positive one? Yeah.
I mean, I just know that. Just wanted to make those out.
For sure.
That's not.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, I mean, like I said, I would applaud your staff who's been really great about sort of being committed to getting the voice as much as possible. So there was a full court press to getting invites out and then a reconvening of, okay, we didn't have anybody show up, so how can we still get that information, right? In a way that that feels authentic to the community being served. This is a lot of words, but they're important. What we tried to do was ensure that we weren't bringing bias to our interpretation of what was being said. So there was a very detailed process that Elisa went through to try and analyze all of the input that we had. So again, we did not have to conduct anything in Russian, but everything that was conducted in Spanish was translated into English. And then first person accounts were sort of pulled for both quotes. So you'll see that in the report. There are kind of illustrative quotes, and then these key kind of highlights that came out of listening and learning, right? So the first is that representation matters, right? So not only does it matter what you see on the walls and that it reflects your language, but that it reflects your culture, it reflects your lived experience, and ensuring that that is honored and celebrated, all of the cultures that make up the sort of tapestry of diversity in your schools, and that it needs to be kind of overtly stated, right? That different identities, all social identities, not just race and ethnicity, but gender identity, sexual orientation, and level of ability are supported. A lot of conversations around, because we weren't necessarily focused exclusively on buildings at this point, right? We were trying to have a conversation about what are your challenges, right? And so expanded bilingual pre-K came up. Many kids aren't arriving kinder ready, right? And that was recognized by both staff and by parents. And so thinking about then what become the facility implications of that. You know, especially because you just had a bond that you kind of cycling through, thinking about kind of the discrepancies between the condition of some of your newer buildings and some of your older buildings, both in terms of the physical condition of the building, but then also in terms of access to technology, newer furniture, you know, the provision of some spaces having gender neutral restrooms and some spaces not having them. And so thinking about kind of how to achieve that parity across your schools. In general, I think there was an acknowledgement that we need upgrades to your sped rooms, right? So thinking about not just that they're needed, but the process by which you arrive at what the new design would be, and trying to ensure that sped students and families have a seat at the table as those are being planned and designed. Thinking about ways in which there can be sort of privacy and dignity provided to not just meeting areas, but testing rooms, counseling areas, not just necessarily for kids in the SPED program, but across kind of all of your student body, but really wanting to ensure that there are behavioral program classrooms at the elementary and middle school levels to meet the needs of your SPED learners, and quite frankly, just some of your learners writ large, right, that are trying to learn self-regulation skills. The other thing that we talked about, and this came out of our conversation primarily with students, that they want to be able to access smaller spaces, right? More student sized spaces that they could own a little bit more. So spaces with comfortable seating, with dimmable lights, wanted to be able to kind of retreat, right? So thinking about kind of the full spectrum of neurodiversity, that sometimes it isn't an identified special education student, but just maybe an introvert that gets overwhelmed, and so wanting to have a space to be able to retreat and regulate themselves, and then be able to kind of come back and be fully ready to learn. And then thinking about kind of the social aspect of it, right? Especially as we were coming out of the pandemic and starting to come back more fully into school, the recognition that the social part of school is still a very important piece, right? So wanting places, comfortable places, warm places to hang out from the elementary level all the way to the high school level, both inside and outside of the building. The other thing that we heard a lot, I will say, especially from your Latinx audiences or your community, is the need for parents to understand how they can be a partner in their children's education, right? And highlighting some of the great work that you're already doing there. I remember specifically in DPAC, right, that they were talking about, oh, you know, part of what we do here is we you know, they'll bring in computers and they'll train us on, this is a program that your kids have and here's how you can support them. But just kind of a recognition that in order for parents to be good partners in educating their children, they need to have the resources, because sometimes certainly language could be an issue, but just in general wanting to ensure that that they have what they need to support their kids. The other topic, or the other area that came up, was the need to connect with the outdoors for well-being and for you know, physical activity, right? So it isn't just about getting kids outside, but providing natural lighting or day lighting, views to the outside, covered play areas, and or you know, places where kids can run and not be covered in mud. To ensure that students can go outside, because it does tend to rain here a little bit, despite what we've witnessed in the last few months. And I think there was a general recognition that you all are doing a wonderful job providing the representation in terms of your staff, right? The personal interactions with multilingual staff create a sense of welcoming, a sense of belonging, and soften the arrival experience, right? Kind of a contrast of looking at how you're greeted face to face versus potentially coming up to a speaker box and having to push a button and then be worried, especially if you don't speak the language. How am I going to be able to communicate and get either myself or my child the services that I need? Yeah, and then the last one is that schools should provide kind of a range of different unique spaces for students that meet a range of group sizes, a range of academic levels, a range of social emotional supports, and their lived experiences. So wanting to ensure that you have a great variety of spaces for kids to learn, grow, and gather. And then with that, we're going to allow some members of your Long Ridge Village Planning Committee to come up and tell you a little bit about their experience.
Hello. So,
Oscar, why don't you introduce yourself and we'll have each person.
perfect. So my name is Oscar and this is for many years, and we have. My name is Cesareo Lingo, and I'm a senior at Woodburn High School.
And I'm Pamela Spurgeon, and I have a student at French grade, a student at two students at Lincoln, and another one that will get preschool eventually.
And we're just a small part of the whole community that participates in this work. So if you can just put the next one, you can see all the names there, which is a lot of names. But right now, as you can see, you have a WST staff member, a student, and a parent. So just that you understand the process, the district came up with the committee, so we could align the vision for the spaces that we have available right now in school with the future goal or our district goal to make sure that we are targeting and making sure that we are meeting all the different future needs that next generations are gonna need, right? Then, as you can see, the district did a really good job in making sure that we have all stakeholders represented in this committee. And then finally, we met 3 times, starting from May, and then we continued to June. June was the last meeting. And they were all in person and very different settings. So the first one was in Washington Elementary. The second one was at Ballard Middle School, and the third one was at the high school, right? So I'm gonna talk about the first meeting, and then Steph's gonna talk about the second meeting, and then Pamela's gonna talk about the last meeting, all right? So the first meeting, it was the kickoff, so we got to understand the process. We kind of got to realize the importance of the committee, and at the same time, we talked about the roles and responsibilities that the committee was going to have. Then Greg let us know and presented a presentation about what we have currently and the ideas of how coming up with new spaces might be important for us for next generation needs and student needs and also supporting our future programs. After that, they also let us know about all the work that we completed under the bond that was passed 7 years ago. And also we talked about what was still left. So we talked about all the main projects that are coming up. So we we're on the same page. After that, we had the time to break into small groups and talk about how important those spaces or what kind of spaces we're going to need in order to support our programs and our students.
So for the second meeting, our main goal was to draw those two concepts and kind of trying to look at how that looks like for our district. So that could be, implementing like kitchens or other career opportunities on campus at the high school or maybe even other schools. And we also did this by splitting into small groups and kind of suggesting ideas for what that might look like. And the other ideas that we came up with were more or so like being more involved with our community. A lot of these ideas, what they all had in common was kind of put academic subjects into context of the real world. And I feel like as a student, now more than ever, that's kind of what we need, especially being that we're still kind of rejuvenating from the pandemic. So that was kind of our main focus for the second meeting.
Okay, and then in the final meeting, we came together and Greg presented us with information about the numbers for the projected students in the future and what our current building capacity is at and where will they fit, basically. And I think a lot of the committee members were actually surprised that we have more space and capacity in our buildings than we realized. We also saw that some buildings are going to be much more impacted in the coming years than others. And, it's starting to think about what does that mean for Woodburn School District and where kids might need to be. And then we also looked at all of these things we prioritized before. And I know Mr. Lario gave us some more information about that meeting about some things that already exist in our district that many people didn't know about, such as career and technical education and different community options that are out there that are already being utilized. And so then as we sat down and we looked at all these ideas we had from previous sessions, and we started to consider, well, if we were going to prioritize and put tier 1 and tier 2 and tier 3 over these next 10 years of what we want to see accomplished and in what order, we took into consideration some of the new information we have been about the capacity we do have within our buildings, some career and technical education that is already being set up. I think it's a consortium in Salem, if I'm recalling correctly that. And so I think some shifts started happening. We realized, well, maybe some of these things we don't have to tackle quite as urgently as we thought we did. Some of them are in progress. And so we came up with some pretty great lists, a pretty full list of things to guide us, I think, as the community moves forward to look at the 10-year plan. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about, follow up on some of the work that we did and also some of the other components of the long range facilities plan. As was discussed, there was a set of guiding principles that emerged from the committee process, and they actually are fairly lengthy, and they're in the full report. There's kind of sub bullets that go with each of these high level guiding principles. But here displayed on the screen, you can see the main guiding principle for each category. So for example, the first one, facilitate experiential learning activities outside the classroom to engage students and provide them opportunities to serve their community. That was something that that was mentioned not only in the dialogue sessions early on, but the committee really felt strongly about, and then had the chance to be able to think about what capital projects would support that goal. For each of these, I don't want to read all of them because I know it's a lot to read, but they are in the full report. And again, I encourage you to check it out with the sub bullets too.
And those were all based on the feedback that we got coming out of hosting and learning, and then with the facilities, the long range facilities group to say, okay, if this is what we heard, how does that translate into an implication for a building, right? What does that look like?
So then we conducted a series of educational advocacy assessments. We did that during the spring. I visited each of your schools, had the opportunity to sit down with the principal and ask a series of questions about how well the facility was working for them from a teaching and learning standpoint. So it's a little different than a building condition assessment. It really is focused on ensuring that the building isn't an obstacle to learning, but indeed that it can actually enhance learning. Some of the things that we asked about and that we looked for when we toured the facility, your classroom features, how well technology was integrated, how well this facility supported STEAM activities or project-based learning, flexible instruction, and adequacy of core areas like commons, library, and gymnasiums, things like that. So we got to spend some time at the school facility, took a lot of pictures, and there was a form that was completed for each of the schools. And in the appendix of the document, you have the long range facilities plan. The forms are all there if you'd like to see those in general. So here's an example of what that report looks like for one facility. So you can see how two categories are organized and the observations are detailed under each one.
As you can tell, those are really hard to see on the screen. But essentially what the report does is it breaks it down into some of those categories that Elisa was talking about earlier, and then lists out how well the facility is achieving that particular category of educational program, right? And so you'll see one of these reports for every school. And Elisa will kind of give you an overview of what came out of it.
Yeah, we're able to capture a lot of the nuance under each of these categories. So for example, because you had recent bond work done, a number of your facilities have new areas that maybe reflect these categories very well, whereas there's other older areas that are a little bit not aligned necessarily with the new areas, but improving and identify some deficiencies and ways that those can be addressed. So for example, when we were actually conducting these assessments, the district was in the process of acquiring new furniture for a lot of its classrooms. And one of the goals of that, was to provide flexible furniture options to enhance that learning experience and try to create environments with more parity between the old and new areas.
One question on the educational adequacy assessment. I know with like the building condition assessments, there's like this score at the end of the assessment. Is there something similar with these, or is it just like item by item?
So we met about that. One of the challenges there, so yes, in the beginning there was, it was difficult to actually score in some regards because of just what I described, that you had new areas and old areas. And so it was one score per category. And so you might have one section, right, of the facility that would be like a 5. And then the older section that might be like a 3. And then it was kind of averaged out to a 4, which didn't really reflect either. And so we opted ultimately to just do the description and not the rating. just because we felt like it wasn't a fair depiction of either. The other thing that we looked at, as Pamela mentioned, was your full projected enrollment versus capacity. And so Davis delivered that presentation earlier this summer. And so you got a chance to look at their 10-year enrollment projections. So we took that information then and we looked at your facilities and said, okay, what's your student capacity and how does that align with what you're anticipating in way of student enrollment? Really the biggest enrollment fluctuation or area of concern was elementary school enrollment. And overall, you can see from this pattern that your elementary enrollment is projected to increase through about 2026 and then start to decline. And so the net difference between your elementary enrollment today and what's anticipated in 10 years is about 240 students, an increase of 11%. Next slide, please. Here's a kind of a snapshot view of what this means for each of your schools. Now it's a little startling to see at Lincoln that you can see the projected enrollment increase is far more than the capacity of the building. So just to orient you, and this information is in the report, the gray line for each of these graphs is the functional capacity of the building, and the orange line is the total capacity. The difference between total and functional capacity assumes like if you could make every potential teaching station used for that purpose, that's how many students you could comfortably fit in the building with the class size goals of the district. Functional capacity adjust that number according to how you're using your classrooms currently. So oftentimes a school will not be able to use every classroom for instruction. So one might be used as a classroom might be used as a Title I reading room, or it might be used for a flexible learning space, or even sometimes administrative offices because there isn't enough administrative space in the school to be able to provide that. So we make adjustments to reflect the use of those spaces. So then you can see by the line with Lincoln that you have a big spike that happens right all the way up through that 2026 year, and then it goes down. Now that's because the reason for that is there's going to be a high amount of residential development beginning in the of this school year, and also you have to, they'll also consider that that's with the students living within the Lincoln attendance area. So one of the other things that are, that's unique about your district is that your elementary schools are all located within close proximity of each other. And so there's a very high rate of in-district transfers, not to leaving your district for other districts, but going to schools that are outside of their school attendance area, but at another Woodburn school. So this table right here shows the percent of students living in the attendance area of each elementary schools versus where they're actually attending. So even though you on the last slide, we saw those graphs. If you look at what the elementary capacity is district-wide, there is sufficient capacity to accommodate your projected growth over the next 10 years. Okay. So here, this graph shows your total elementary capacity, including all of your elementary schools, versus what your enrollment projections are going to be. And you can see we're even under the functional capacity of your buildings. But what this, the significance of this though, is that there need to be a different approach with enforcing school boundaries. So that could be either through different policies or even moving programs, but it would require a shift of students potentially to other facilities. Okay. So for middle school enrollment, a different pattern. It's increasing a little bit, but then decreasing, and is actually a net decrease in enrollment today versus in 2031. And next slide. So you can see kind of a similar issue here, not quite as dramatic as your elementary schools. French Prairie is experiencing the greatest spike in enrollment, Ballard decreasing enrollment. So again, if you were to equalize these, there is sufficient capacity, but a more balanced approach is needed.
There's into a draft meeting, were those some recommendations to boundaries, or are those the content?
Those, the data supports based on the current boundaries, the current school boundaries. Yeah, so a lot of students, right now there's enough capacity in your elementary schools to be able to accommodate requests for attending schools that are different than the ones they're residing in. As conditions become more crowded, there may be less flexibility with that.
So they wouldn't project out to review,
At this point, I think you're fine. It's also, it may not even be changing your boundaries as much as enforcing the boundaries you have, right? So right now, because you're not seeing the spike yet, I don't want to say all requests, but there is much more ability to grant in-district transfers, people that want to, that live in a particular boundary, but want to go to a school outside that boundary. So in the future, you may need to look at a policy that says, we're going to have to create conditions under which we would approve a transfer. If you're worried about, for example, the spike at Lincoln, right? In order to equalize that across your district, you may also say, we may need to take a program that's really successful that is driving a desire to attend that school and duplicate that somewhere else in the district. That way you can spread some of that out. Those are some strategies that you would use. I don't know that you would necessarily need to change your boundaries. You might just need to change your policies to more enforce your boundaries.
Ask the question.
Exactly. For sure. And a lot of that is, program driven, right? We're in high school.
So for high school enrollment, it was a little tricky for Davis to make those projections because you were shifting from a core school model within the facility to back to one unified school. So they are forecasting a pretty stable enrollment for the next 10 years, only increasing a net increase of only 26 students by 2031. But they admit that the accuracy of that was difficult to ensure that because we just don't know what that change is going to mean for your future enrollment going to one school. So you can see on this slide your capacity from high school relative to projected enrollment. So significance of this information to our long-range facilities plan and to capital improvement plan in general is that you're looking at your projections. There is adequate capacity in your current facilities to meet your enrollment needs over the next 10 years. But then, like Karina and I explained, that there may be the need to enforce school boundaries or adjust policies or perhaps relocate programs just to kind of distribute and equalize that enrollment, especially across your elementary schools and to some degree middle schools.
Yeah, any questions about that before we go into kind of the school-based summaries? Auda, don't know. Do you have any questions?
So I'm just going to show you guys some of the content of the report. So a big piece of the report is a school profile section for each of your facilities. And that provides the capacity of the building and breakdown of how that was calculated, your enrollment capacity graph, a floor plan that shows how each of your spaces are being utilized, kind of color coded, and then a description of those items as well as the educational adequacy of the facilities and what was noted during the assessments. So that there's a profile section for each school facility, and that's now in here for each CFS. And then lastly, there's the capital improvement plan, and this was the work that was generated from the committee, and that was talked about where they were able to prioritize projects by tier. And so you don't need to read all these, but again, that's in the report, and so that's reflected there.
Any questions? We'll say that these reports are dense, right? Because they bring with them a lot of data, right? To try and get to them. And so for folks in the community, there is an executive summary that kind of talks about kind of what are the big pieces and kind of what are the takeaways from that. It's a long takeaway.
I wasn't sure, but we did need to add an additional facility, elementary school. The district does have property that.
We do have a
can be
couple
used for
parcels.
that, right?
We have a couple of parcels that don't have anything on them. We also have very large parcels where some of those will be located now, so we need to fill out these.
And that was an item too, I think I'm hoping the plan is because also start to look for additional, sites, in the future within, 7 to 15 or something.
And also thinking about, again, as programs shift and evolve, or as funding becomes available, for example, for expanded early education, right? But whether it's pre-K or even earlier than pre-K, what are the implications of that, especially to combat some of what we heard in the listening and learning about students coming to school not kindergarten ready, right? So as state funding for teachers to support those and programs to support those becomes available, then you have to think about what are the facility implications for that, right? And that is how an enrollment projection doesn't necessarily tell you that story. That may be where you need to say, okay, well, because we want to be able to do that, then we have to think about, are we going to provide a couple of pre-K classrooms, a couple more pre-K classrooms at every space? Are we going to design a single location where that's going to be housed, or look at particular programs, right? How do you support CTE in conjunction with the work that you're doing down south at the, I think it's Metro County,
Willamette Career Academy.
Academy. But thinking about kind of how those can work in conjunction.
And if you look at that long list, and if you have a copy of the full report where it says capital improvement plan, you've got tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, and that sorting happened from all of the feedback that came in. And the tier 1s are the things that are either, some of them are already underway, so you can look at those, and some of them, the rest of them are projecting that 1 to 7 year timeline. The tier 2 ones are 8 to 13 years. And the tier 3 are beyond that, so beyond 13 years. And those things obviously can change, but those were just kind of sorted by the group. And again, some of them are kind of underway, and other ones we'll have to look at and discuss because they're in the fairly near future. Really appreciate the work that Brick, that you and your team did. That's a lot of work to bring all the folks in, and the Long Range Facility Plan Committee members and the folks who got interviewed. This is a really kind of an important piece of work for us. It really helps organize our thinking around budget planning and future planning. So it's a great piece of work, and I appreciate the time that people in the community put into it, and of course the team at Brick to put it together. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm just curious, were there any conversations that can be regardless of what we do, and then the recommendations?
Yeah, I would say that there were conversations in community. There were a couple of questions that we asked, right? One is, how safe do you or your children feel at school, right? Both physically and then also socially, emotionally, right? Because part of what we want to get at there is our especially students or families that have social identities that are outside of the margins. How do they feel supported kind of within their community, right? And then we also looked at the physical safety, right? And so I think overall in your district that there was positive responses to both of those. But we did have conversations, I remember, with the long range facilities plan, and you could talk a little bit if any of those made it to capital improvement planning around ensuring, because you just passed a bond as well, that where I believe you created, you did a lot of work around that, around creating safe entry vestibules, for example, at every one of your schools, right? So thinking, people felt like the investment that happened in the last bond addressed a lot of their concerns. But, you know, you'll see projects on the capital improvement plan that start to address. Mostly, I think it's around site-based, safety and security, right? Traffic drop off.
Yeah, traffic drop off was a big item. People did appreciate and recognize the work, the incredible amount of work that was done under the last bond, you know, to create the secure entry vestibules. And even some of the aspects that were kind of still softening that arrival experience, like where there was heating in the middle of the vestibule and things like that. There was talk about creating social emotional safety by having like wellness rooms and areas for students to be able to practice kind of self-regulation skills. When we did the educational advocacy assessment, safety and security is one of the categories that we look at. And so that was something that when we talked to the principals and when we toured the buildings, that we documented visually wherever there seemed to be areas of concern. I think that just consider what's been going on now in the recent schools. His conversations around that. I mean, it's a school.
Yeah, I'm assuming you're talking about active shooter, things like that, right?
I mean, creating things.
Yeah, so like I said, I think your community recognized the investment that you've already made in the previous bond that you had. I think there was a general feeling that your campuses are safe. By that, at least that's what we experienced in the listening and learning that we heard in your community. And the conversations that were had both with the principal were very specific. So right at Nellie Muir, are there areas where you have safety and security concerns? And then they would be able to say, you know, this isn't an actual statement, but oh, there's an area around the school where it's kind of it's maybe a little bit hidden, and so it's hard to supervise. And so it would be great to get either windows from a classroom that could provide passive supervision or video surveillance, or in some way improve access to being able to see a hidden spot, right? That is not something that came up, so I'm just using that as an example. And then those were brought forward to the long range facilities planning committee, and they were able to then say, oh, okay, is that a project that we want to prioritize on our capital improvement list? Anything else? So,
No,
thank you.
thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on back to the future to Percy Chapman, and this time we'll be doing the Department of Teaching and Learning report.
Yeah.
All right. Good evening again, Kara Vela Moreno, board member, and Superintendent Morlock. So yeah, we'll try this again. So this is
Sorry.
what on the Department of Teaching and Learning. So as I mentioned previously, I will be talking about 3 different areas that we're really focusing on for this year. So the language arts adoption and implementation, the math adoption, and then our coaching model for this year. So I'll start off with the language arts adoption implementation. So if you recall last year in the spring, we came and presented what the adoption committee wanted to adopt, and we moved forward with that. And so we purchased language arts adoption materials that we are implementing in elementary and middle school. The high school team is still working on identifying the materials that they would like to move forward with. And so as soon as they are done with that process, we'll bring that to you. And then we adopted for Spanish language arts for middle and high school. So those are the materials that we are implementing this year. And we started with having some intensive professional development in August. And that was some optional PD that we provided for teachers to come in August for multiple days where they could come and really dig into the materials with trainers from the publishing companies. They had the opportunity to do some planning. We had some teachers that participated in that. And then during in-service, we did some onboarding for all of our staff with the new materials. And again, that was provided by the publisher so that our teachers could really start to learn the materials, start to see how they are laid out, how they'll be utilizing them. We are not requiring teachers to implement until December, so that they have some time to get training and really be comfortable and start planning with the materials before they have to implement. But if teachers want to implement trainer, they're welcome to, and we do have a number of teachers who are already implementing the new materials. And then we'll continue to provide support throughout the year. So throughout the fall, once a month, we're having professional development, with training around the materials from the publisher, continuing each month for these teachers. And then we also have a co-teaching model, which I'll talk a little bit more about after I go through the language arts adoption and the math adoption information. But our instructional coaches this year are really targeting supporting the implementation of the language arts materials. And so they're engaging in co-teaching cycles with teachers to help them implement the materials, figure out how they'll design instruction using these materials. And so, as I said, I'll give you more information about that in a few minutes. And then we've also had some teams that are coming together and really spending a lot of time digging into the materials and doing some collaborative planning, looking at some 612 articulation of our instruction and the materials. And then we're also working on the Russian translations for this year and looking for some authentic supplemental text that we can purchase for our Russian program. And then for the math adoption, so this year we're engaging in the process to select the materials that we would like to recommend for adoption. And so the vision for this is to adopt and purchase mathematics materials that support students in their mastery of mathematics and pathway to biliteracy. And so we have 3 different outcomes that this group will be focused on. One is recommending materials for adoption and purchase. And then ensuring that these materials can support a vertical articulation and a horizontal alignment. So looking at, we have new math standards in the state, we have a new math model, and so we'll be looking for materials that will support the implementation of those. And then ensuring that all partner voices are heard through equitable representation in our committee. So those are some of our outcomes. Here we have a timeline of the work that we're engaging in. So the committee will meet for the first time in October. And just like we did with the materials adoption last year for language arts, we'll spend the first several meetings learning together as a team to really create a base of knowledge that the team is working from. Then in the kind of mid-year, like November, December, ODE will release the list of materials that are on the state adopted list. And so the teams will start to dig into those materials. They'll determine which ones they want to move forward with. They'll have identified criteria that they've established as a team that they'll be utilizing to select the materials that they want to pilot. And then in January, February, March, we'll invite teachers, both teachers on the adoption team as well as other teachers in the district who are not participating in the adoption team. We'll invite as many teachers as possible to pilot the materials, and during the pilot, we collect a lot of feedback from teachers so that the adoption committee can review that feedback and then make an informed decision about which materials they would like to recommend to you for adoption in the spring. And then once we go through that process, ideally that happens in May. And then in June, we can start really planning for the professional development and the rollout plan for the following year. What's that? We put out to the entire district, we put out an interest form to see who wants to participate. And so we try to get equal participation from elementary, middle, and high, from the different language strands, different grade levels. We invite administrators to participate. And then through the process, we also have different opportunities for parents to give input and students. Excuse me, don't serve on the committee, but the committee gets input from different partner groups. So, but we try to have a pretty balanced, like, across the grade levels, language strands.
And so we're in that process.
Yeah, we've been recruiting teachers and administrators for the last few weeks. And so we're starting to put together the final list and see where we've got some gaps, and then be a little bit more intentional about reaching out to specific grade levels or specific schools if we don't have, like, we have one elementary that had a lot of interest and some of the others not as much, and so we try to get more interest from the other elementary schools.
Okay.
So my question is like, where in this process do you want parents? Where in this process?
Typically, it's once we get down to kind of the final two options that we're looking at.
And what kind of mentality? They review it, they.
Yeah, we have them available if parents want to come in and review. Last year, we hosted Zoom sessions where there was kind of an overview of the materials that we typically have the publishers do that because they're the most familiar with the materials. And so they provide an overview of it. This year, we want to try some different things to see if we can get more parents involved. And so we'll be working with the committee to figure out some other ideas. We usually put information in like the superintendent newsletter on the website. So
So it sounds like
we can.
parents are part of this process at the end. Once.
Mhm.
to propose.
Mhm.
And what else do you-
Yeah, usually kind of once the process is getting more narrowed down. All right, and the last thing that I wanted to share with you tonight is around our coaching model for this year. So with our instructional coaches, we are engaging in co-teaching cycles this year. And so it's a way that we're providing some job embedded professional development for our teachers that really focuses on our instructional framework. And we are really focusing on the new materials adoption. And so at the elementary level, for example, all of the coaches are cycling with teachers. They're doing like a 3-week cycle with different teachers to help them implement the new materials. The instructional coaches engaged in the learning in the summer. They came and got to that deep dive into the materials in August. And so they're engaging in the co-teaching cycles with teachers where they will go into a classroom. They might teach part of the lesson with the teacher. They might do an observation and give feedback. The coach might model a lesson while the teacher watches. I've gone in and watched some lessons where the coach and the teacher are both teaching together. So they kind of take turns with different parts of the lesson. They're planning together. So they're really spending a lot of time together to provide that job embedded professional development. And so they it's a way to have a consistent teaching and learning partner. And then they're looking at the formative assessment data and the kind of the daily data that they're getting from students and making decisions about where to go next with instruction. And so this year, our major focus, like I mentioned, is around the language arts materials. The second half of the year, we have some coaches that will be switching and focusing on more on math and starting to work with the teachers who are on the adoption committee for math and going into their classrooms and doing some co-teaching cycles with them as a way to really start to engage with teachers and see where we are with math instruction and what the shifts will look like as we adopt new materials. We also have one coach who is focusing on AVID at the secondary level. So she's supporting our teachers that are teaching AVID elective, AVID Excel, and then supporting other teachers just with the instructional practices that we implement as a part of our school-wide AVID. Excuse me. And so we plan to continue this model of co-teaching throughout this year, and the next year, the focus would shift towards supporting the implementation of the math materials. And so the plan going forward would be to always have the co-teaching cycles revolving around the implementation of new adopted materials. And then we're also planning to target teachers in their 3rd to 5th year. Their first 2 years in the district, they get support from our new teacher mentors. And so then after they go through the mentoring program, they would switch and then get support from the instructional coaches like their 3rd to 5th year of teaching, so that they're getting both that support from the mentors that typically focuses more on classroom management, just kind of how to be a teacher, how to be in the classroom, reading, like navigating all of the systems that we have. And then the 3rd to 5th year, which could really focus more heavily on the instructional side of teaching. So that's the plan for our coaching model going forward.
If you do the new curriculum model, have you?
We've always had instructional coaches, but it's been a little bit more kind of based on individual teacher needs, and so it's been sort of sporadic and not as coordinated, and so we're really trying to focus on some specific goals that we have as a district. So implementing our materials, really supporting teachers in their 3rd to 5th year, and it'll still be available to teachers for those individual needs, but a little bit more targeted to some of our specific goals.
So this model would be.
I mean, the more targeted approach, yes. Another question?
Yeah, I have a comment first. We shared with Superintendent Warlock that we wanted to give you all some good guideline for reports. I thought this was a good example of what a streamlined report could look like with the 3 points. So good job doing that. I do have a question about the first one with the adoption and implementation of the new materials. What's the overall feel from the teachers, or do we feel supported, overwhelmed? And is there anything that can be done to help them during this change?
Yeah, I think that there is a little bit of everything right now. Even though some teachers, it's overwhelming. We only adopt materials every 7 years. And so language arts is a really big one because it affects so many teachers. Something like world language only affects a small group of teachers. So, and literacy instruction at elementary is a big part of the day. So I think there's some feelings out there that, yeah, are kind of overwhelmed, some that are very excited. A lot of teachers, like I said, have already started implementing the materials, even though we gave them until December to start with them. The coaches are currently in their first cycle with teachers. The new materials come with like a 3-week launch, kind of like a 0 unit, where it focuses on classroom routines and getting students ready to engage with the materials. And then the unit 1 is an additional 3 weeks. So for this first cycle, the coaches have stayed with the teachers kind of through that launch and then into the actual first unit. And so we are going to be, after teachers engage in the co-teaching cycles, they'll fill out a survey about the experience. And so that'll give us a little bit more information about how supported the co-teaching cycle has been and how we can make adjustments throughout the year based on that data.
One of the big challenges is that teachers are all getting present. So I've been in some classrooms recently where they're fully using, they've got all the things out, they've got the baggage set up, they've got what's going on, they're trying. So some people try it out. I think people they're going to try 1 activity a week or 2 or 3. So the challenge is finding that kind of place where you can support people wherever they are. Because some people will really dive in, others will wait, some people will experiment a little bit. And so there's just and that's part of this feedback loop that Chris and her team does, is to find out, okay, now where are you? What have you tried? Where are the things full? And then it's easy to build that support plan for teachers after they have some time to knock around and do it.
This is the first major implementation.
So it's every 7 years, generally, every 7 years. Now, if you're an elementary teacher, that means that every year they're going to have it. So the conversation is around it. What are we doing with that? Less stuff for the teach every single thing. That can be a lot.
And the next question I had was related to co-teaching. I think just in terms of the level of support, right? So like it sounds like a great program, but it's every teacher getting that same attention, or how is that differentiated? You can mention year 3 to 5. Is that the target group?
Yeah, so we don't have enough instructional coaches to do a cycle with every single teacher. So what we did is we, teachers who were early adopters, like the ones who wanted to start implementing materials right away, like they came to the summer training and, they were really ready to go. We started with that group of teachers because we knew that they wanted to implement the materials, and it would be an opportunity for the coaches to really learn kind of alongside with the teachers how to implement the new materials. And then after that, we're focusing on teachers kind of in that 3rd to 5th year, because if we always focus on the 3rd to 5th year, at some point, as teachers retire and all these new teachers are coming in, we would cycle through all the teachers in the district at some point. But then if, like I said, if there are other teachers who also want to go through a co-teaching cycle, we're doing everything we can to fit them in if they weren't on like the original list that we created. Because once teachers go through it, they start to talk to their colleagues and they say, oh, I went through the cycle and it was really helpful. And then other people want to engage in them as well. So we're trying to get to as many teachers as possible this year, but we won't be able to provide it for every single teacher. But the teachers also work on grade level teams. And so the knowledge that they're getting and the experience that they're getting through these co-teaching cycles, they can take that back to their grade level teams and share that and then kind of, take on a leadership role within their team.
Any other questions?
No survey.
Mhm.
At the end.
At the end of their like 3-week cycle that they're doing with the coaches. Yeah, and then we'll use that to just analyze kind of what the feedback has been to see how we need to adjust the model if we need to adjust it. And maybe hopefully all the feedback is, is positive, and so we'll continue with what we're doing. But if there is feedback that we need to make adjustments, then we'll do that.
Okay. Oh, I didn't know. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Kristen.
I won't be back.
No.
No.
Finish that. Next up, I'd like to invite Dana Christie. She's our Director of Student Services, and she'll be doing 2 reports. She'll begin with the Student Services Department report and then moving into the counseling framework report after that.
So good evening, Superintendent, Board Chair, School Board. So I approached my student services board presentation this year from more of a 30,000 foot level, knowing that you are new to the school board and haven't really heard my field on my department. So you can go ahead and get it. There. So the role of student services really is to work on the individual student level and small group student level to support students, ensuring that they have access to the general education curriculum. So in order to do that, we coordinate and support the programs that I have up here. Special education is a program that spans from birth to age 21 that we're responsible for. Section 504, school counseling and social work. You can read through the list, but really it's any individual student support that is needed to help students access education. So how are we organized to support these programs? We have a lot of staff that support students at the individual and small group level. I added it all up and I was surprised. There's approximately 160 staff in our district that are supporting these students on the individual level. And you can read through the list, but we support students with health needs, counseling needs, mental health, social emotional needs, physical therapists, we have nurses, we have vision specialists, we have so many different people working at this support level for students. And one of the things that we do as a department is we meet with parents a lot. So last year, well, we have approximately 800 students on IEPs or in special education, which means that we had at least 800 parent meetings in the special education department. Actually, it's probably more like 1,500 parent meetings. Last year alone, Pam is my assistant director of student services. She and I read over 700 individual education plans to review and give feedback to staff who wrote them. We have around 140 504 plans in the district, like 540-ish, I would say by now, health plans in the district, 50 individual behavior plans that I'm aware of. I didn't put the number of safety plans and pregnant or parenting team plans because that's pretty confidential. So I did put the number there. But those are also individual parent needs that we have. And let's just start. There's more individual parent needs that we have every year. We have the unique opportunity of talking to parents every day. So this year we have a few areas of focus. Number one being special education and section 504 compliance.
the pandemic put a lot of stress on special educators and counselors, and there was a lot of extra responsibilities that came their way from the state. And so we had a little bit of drift in our compliance, so we are getting back on top of that. And to do that, we're reviewing everybody's work that they're doing, and they're getting better every day. It's amazing. We are focused on increasing student engagement in all individualized plans. We want to see students in those meetings. We believe that it's student agency that will help students meet their goals. So we want them to be involved in all of the planning that's sort of. We're working on increasing rigor in all of our special education programs. We want to see our students meeting their goals and accessing more and more of the regular education curriculum. And one really big thing we're working on this year is we are engaging in a school-based health center needs assessment. Our very first committee meeting actually is Thursday, so we're looking forward to that. And I will be presenting on this as well, but we're focusing on the implementation of a comprehensive counseling framework this year. Do you have any questions?
Can you talk a bit about the radiation of the science in terms of
It can entail that. Really, those plans are very individualized, whatever the student really needs. Some of those, maybe there's kids who are in CLC, receiving support. Maybe it is about academics. Maybe we're helping them come up with an alternative way to graduate. Just whatever they need to graduate from high school with that extra that they have on their plate. Sometimes they're in counseling. I don't know the answer to that.
Well, these are K through 12.
Well, K through age 21. We also have a transition program, which we serve students after graduation until they turn 21.
Is that only stable at number 800?
Yes, for the last few years, we've been around 800. We've been kind of pretty holding steady there. We had a little dip last year because of the pandemic, but we're coming back up.
And once we talk to parents about what kind of feedback you tend to get during those meetings, what are the parents concerned with, in what ways are parents helping out?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that most parents are concerned about their children's success. They want their kids to be successful, and whatever that is. When we're in a kindergarten meeting, they want to make sure that their kids are getting along with their friends and that they're following the rules. And when we're in a high school meeting, they want to make sure their kids are on track to graduate and that they're going to be prepared for college or for the job that they're interested in, whatever that is. So I think parents are always they really want their kids to succeed and to be happy. And so we have those kinds of conversations. That's what the meetings are about. How do we help students succeed?
You have that initial IEP meeting all the time. And then how many more times during the year can you talk about time?
Well, there are some students that we might only meet once a year for the IEP meeting, but there will be other students that we're meeting to problem solve periodically, and we're changing the IEP because something's not working or they've met a goal, and so we need to rewrite the IEP and write a new goal. But we have some parents that we're meeting on a weekly basis, depending on the need of their students. So it's really hard to say. And then every 3 years we reevaluate to see if they still qualify for special education. So then that year we have an extra meeting for that student. Yes, it can be. So the law says that if a student is exhibiting a pattern of behavior, that we should meet the functional behavior assessment. So those behavior plans are driven by that functional behavior assessment. So they're pretty
in-depth parent sign consent, and there's an evaluation that happens, and then a behavior plan that's written as a result of that.
Would be an example of
Functional behavior. So, well, what functional behavior means? So the function, we're getting really complicated here, so I will try to answer this as simply as I can. So really what we're asking is why is the student acting like they are? Are they trying to get something? Are they needing something? Are they trying to get away from something? What is the reason? What is the function of the behavior? Why are they doing what they're doing? We try to figure that out. That's what the analysis is. If we can figure that out, then we write a plan to help them strategize and problem solve for themselves. You know, it's always a work in progress, so you're always trying. Like, we think it might be this. You're making a hypothesis. We think it might be this, and so we're trying to figure it out, and we keep coming back to the drawing board until we get it right. It just depends on the student. Sometimes we get it right away, and then other times it takes a long time. Yeah, so that's all those different people that work to support students. They all play a role, and some of that is outside support, or and then sometimes we would be referring outside to even other agencies and support.
Yeah, I don't have another question, but it looks like, a second report.
Yes. So this is about our comprehensive counselor program, guidance and counseling program. I just put the policy up here in case you were interested. This is the policy that drives this program. Also, if you have access to this slide deck, if you click on that little blue manual there, you can go straight to our comprehensive counseling program and read our manual. So, okay, so the overarching program goal of the comprehensive counseling program is to support all students to acquire foundational knowledge and skills for academics, career development, social emotional development, and community involvement. The school counseling framework is a program which is integrated into the entire educational program. It's designed to reach all students. It's about prevention and intervention, so it's not all intervention. In fact, it's more prevention than it is intervention. And it's systematic, accountable, and data-driven. It is not supplemental. So the program, like I already mentioned, addresses 4 domains: academic development, career development, social emotional development, and community involvement. There are 2 ways that we serve students as counselors, with direct and indirect services. So some of the direct services would be the core curriculum, and that looks different throughout the grade levels. That's the guidance portion of the counseling program. We do individual student planning. And then of course, there's always responsive services. And then those indirect student services is more referral, collaboration, and consultation with other people in the system. System support, which would look like serving on school teams, PBIS teams, FIT teams, those kinds of things, and then student advocacy. I went a little bit more in depth on this slide in particular because I know a lot of questions come up around this. What are the mental health supports that we provide in our school counseling program? So we do contract with Marion County, and we have, I believe it's almost a full-time drug and alcohol health counselor that supports our students. Those students are referred to that counselor, and then he meets with them to evaluate, and then if they need more support, he provides it. We also have a full-time contract with Marion County for individual mental health therapy. We also, I'm proud to say for the first time ever, have 3 licensed clinical social workers. We have 1 at each level this year. And then counselors and school psychologists are trained to provide some individual student counseling services and then refer to outside agencies as appropriate. I just wanted to put a little blurb down here, and I won't read it to you, but I think that the main thing to understand is that school counselors provide individual counseling to students, and really it's focused on helping them access education. Some of the things they talk about would be self-esteem, interpersonal relationships, social skills, hygiene. We have gentlemen's groups, substance abuse, violence prevention, but they never diagnose or provide extended therapy. And so how many students are full-time clinician? I don't know exactly how many she has on her caseload right now, but really it's just as much as she can. Like, you're right, she can only provide so much. She does see kids in all 3 of our levels, elementary, middle, and high, but mainly at the high school level. And then the drug and alcohol counselor, I would his caseload is not near as high, it's much more manageable. So it's not at school. We do refer out to community partners. No, we don't. And even sometimes when we refer to the Marion County mental health parents and students, all we can do is refer. And you are medical specialists to be very interesting. Yes. So they do carry a caseload at the elementary and middle level. They meet with small groups and they work on some specific skills, self-regulation type skills, and then they meet one-on-one with parent permission. At the high school level, they meet more often one-on-one, and it's a by referral basis, and they carry a very full caseload. So their parents wanted their students to have access to their school. It would come through a referral, and parents would contact the school, and then the school has systems for referral, so they would go to SIT teams and different. They have different processes at each school for referring kids to the right place. And outside of these services, do we have other contracts or other clinicians coming to our schools and provide? This is what we have right now. The school-based health company. Is that what yes, I think that's part of the questions that they're asking in the data that we'll be looking at.
Yeah, it's a good one. Just came out. So I don't know if that data of what that's look like in terms of still in demand for us. How that's going. I do have some data, which is actually pretty positive. So, for example, our drug and alcohol data last year was the number of referrals was fewer than pre-pandemic.
I know that for sure. I have that. I couldn't tell you exactly, for the mental health counseling. We had a lot of the stuff we worked on in schools was around self-regulation and around just relearning how to be a student. Some of our kids, if you think about like a sixth grader last year, or like a seventh grader, they had never been in middle school before, all of those things. So we did a lot of work around that. And it was that kind of social emotional learning where it was really about learning how to regulate and learning how to problem solve and those kinds of things. So not really mental health support, but more and just that stress support, right? Like where we could help them learn how to deal with that coping skills and those kinds of things. So I don't know what the difference is on the mental health line.
As a clinician, it's not a little concerning. You know, as I see a lot of times, if I go something, I know not started. So really all of our students in COVID, and so it's just like, what's going on? I know other school districts provide clinicians that these schools. But if you have students who are maybe connected to an outside clinician, and let's say that family, their student wanted this service during the school day, can that clinician come onto the school and provide that service, or does it have to be only after school?
Yeah, not right now, we're not doing that, and there's multiple reasons that we're not doing that, but that's not something, I think we've talked before, that's not something that we're close to, we just haven't been doing that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tina. And then, as I mentioned in the email, we will move the language program coordinator report to the following, which then skips us over to our first operation report. Sarah Bishop, our director of business.
Good evening, everyone. In your board packet, you have the financial report, and we started to include the enrollment reports again. Obviously, over the summer, we don't have much to report on regarding enrollment, and it's time to add that back in. So I did not include the general fund report this time because, to be perfectly honest with you, nothing has really happened in the general fund until we have our first payroll. After our first payroll, that's when those payroll encumbrances start to show. And before that, it's kind of misleading, showing all these large available budgets when really they're already set aside for things that will be happening throughout the year. So as you can see on your ESSER report, things are moving right along. We have spent down and encumbered all of ESSER 2, which is fantastic. So we're moving over to continuing to spend ESSER 3 funds, which is absolutely great. Things are moving right along there. You'll see most of the expenditures are in the 1,000 functions, which is our direct instruction function. Any questions about ESSER? Or other financial questions?
The remaining, the 14, the balance remaining, that's mostly also 3
That is all ESSER 3.
hours.
Correct.
And then what's the deadline to spend?
We have until 2024, September of 2024, to spend that. Yeah.
And we have a plan.
Yes, absolutely. We had to submit a plan to the state on what the plans are. There's a portion that needs to be spent to address learning loss, things like that. So it is all laid out. Yeah. And then you'll see the enrollment reports. Presently, our enrollment is up a little higher than it was last year. So I'm going to continue to show these snapshots each month. I'm going to roll it up month over month as well, so you guys can kind of see how attendance and enrollment tracks throughout the year. I'll continue to include that historical data. As you can see, we're still down pretty significantly from 1920. But again, we are up a little higher than we were last year. It'll be interesting to see how that tracks.
throughout the remainder of the year.
So when do we get our first estimates? When do the
For next year,
Mhm.
so at the end of October, we have, it seems so silly. At the end of October, we have to submit our estimated enrollment for 23-24 for the following year. So that will be then coming out. We'll get something in the spring. So we're always operating in several fiscal years. So in October, again, October of this year, we're going to be projecting enrollment for the following year. Yeah, we'll look at that. We'll look at some birth rates and incoming kinder class sizes, and we'll project it out that way. We'll also look at graduating class rate, because as you can see, when you look at this, there's a pretty big bump at 9-12. So we have some larger classes in secondary. So we kind of trend them through to make sure we're actually looking at how enrollment has been moving through the system. And yes, we'll project it out based upon that.
It's important to remember though, that, so we're going to project next year's enrollment in this October. So years from now, not knowing where we're going to be, we will get an estimate on how much we'll get from the state, not knowing what our tax revenue will be. And so part of the reason that, and people ask us all the time, why do you have any new fund balance? Because there are times we don't know how many kids are going to come. We're going to estimate that. We're going to get an estimate on what our revenues will be. We're going to use those estimates to create a budget, which is our best guess, that has to be turned in by June 30, but we won't find out what we're really getting until sometime later. And so I think one of the important concepts around budgeting is to understand that we run everything from estimates, which is why we keep an ending fund balance to allow us to ebb and flow on those things and hit the emergency uses. But it is important to recognize that we do our best, but we're only estimating based on what we know now for October, the following October, to get the estimates in the spring to build our budget. So there's a lot of, crystal ball stuff, but there's also, we have to do the best we can with the data we have to create a budget.
There's also a big portion of the estimate we get is based upon how other districts estimate as well. So we were really fortunate in that even though our enrollment was declining over the pandemic, it wasn't declining as fast as other districts throughout the state. So it didn't impact us as significantly financially as it did other districts. So as we move forward, if our enrollment doesn't track with how other districts are tracking, it could impact us more. So again, we do our best to estimate our enrollment, but we're also impacted as to what's happening in other districts throughout the state as well.
So we approve a budget based on the estimate. And then do we go back and revise that budget once we get the final? Is that how it works?
Well, we don't revise the budget necessarily, so we'll know what our actual revenues coming in are, and so that'll change either up or down wherever our fund balance is. We're not going to be too far away. It won't be too wildly different. It's only when, and we had this happened many years ago, and I think it was Portland Public that misestimated and it messed with everybody's budget across the state because they're such a large district. And I don't want to blaming anybody, but I know there was an estimate thing that happened, and it did affect. I was in Canby at the time. It affected us, and affected lots of districts because we all are reliant upon each other doing a good job in their estimates to keep the fluctuation too much.
And ODE, we will rebalance our estimates throughout the year as each district reports on their ADM. So again, even though we're projecting what's going to happen next year, throughout next year as well, they will continue to look at our average daily membership and make adjustments on our funding as well.
Up or down.
Up or down, correct.
So.
Yes, and if for some reason it has never happened to us, thankfully, knock on wood. But if the estimate does go down, you do owe that money back to ODE immediately.
If that did happen, we just use that for reserves that we have.
Correct.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Okay, thank
Thanks,
you.
Sarah. Where's your the confirmation items?
And we have meeting minutes from August 23rd and September 23rd. And then we can move as a group, right?
Right, for all of them, so if anyone wishes to pull one out to talk about, they can, and if not, you can vote them as a full slate.
Um, there any one of these items that we need to review? Pull out? Mhm. Is there a motion? Is there a second?
Second,
Yeah. All those in favor to confirm the item, say aye. Aye.
aye.
The motion will pass. Board action items, looks like there's no other business. For new business, we have 3 items. The first one is Hispanic Heritage Month. Resolution number 22-012. This one that the board chair reads.
Yep, unless you have volunteer. possibly. Only the board gets through that.
Let's go National Hispanic Heritage Month, September 15th. To October 15th, 2023, resolution number 22-012. Whereas Hispanic Heritage Week, which began in 1968 under President Lyndon Johnson, was expanded to National Hispanic Heritage Month by President Ronald Reagan. And enacted into law in 1988 to cover a 30-day period starting on September 15th. The day which represents the anniversary of independence for 5 Latin American countries. And whereas Hispanic Heritage Month celebrates the historic and cultural contributions of the Latinx community and acknowledges their influence on politics, economy, and their social and cultural life throughout the United States. And whereas Woodburn School District recognizes that the Hispanic and Latinx people and cultural heritage contribute to our nation's success in extraordinary ways. They are integral to our economy and success. They are part of our schools and community. And whereas 87% of our students and 50% of our staff are Latinx. And whereas the huge and significant impact of Hispanic and Latinx cultures and their centuries-old traditions are manifested in the achievements, customs, and laws of this state and nation. And whereas our schools honor and preserve the linguistic and cultural assets of students through dual language programs, these contribute to producing students who are prepared for the Oregon by literacy certificate and highly sought after job quality, as well as honoring and enriching the diverse background of our students from Spanish-speaking households. And whereas cultural diversity is a core value of our district, we remain unwavering in the expectation that diversity will be celebrated and the strengths and attributes of each student will be valued. And now therefore be it resolved that the Woodburn School District Board of Directors proclaims September 15th through October 15th to be National Hispanic Heritage Month. And be it further resolved that the Woodburn School District Board of Directors strongly encourages all members of our community to join in this observance, celebrating our Latinx community. Next business item is nutrition services. Heritage Elementary and Dollar Middle School equipment replacement.
And Sarah Bishop will return to walk us through this.
Good evening. So we have some equipment at the shared Heritage and Valor Kitchen that needs to be replaced. There's a point now where usually we're able to get our equipment fixed. There is plenty of parts available, but this equipment is at the stage where it needs to be completely replaced. So a little background: when we purchased things with our child nutrition program funding, it has to be approved by ODE first. And there's some pretty specific guidelines we have to follow. So we do that first. So what you're seeing here has already been approved by our child nutrition specialist at ODE. And now it's just in front of you for your final approval. And you can see the equipment listed there. Hopefully this will resolve all of the issues that they're having, yes. Although I will say things break down. We generally have them fixed pretty quickly to fix it out.
It's all original from day one of the station.
No, some of these things have been replaced, but like the past refrigerator, I believe that one's original. The kettle that has already been replaced. The oven, I believe, is original, but some of it has been replaced before.
Well, we only special knowledge.
Yeah, we take really good care of our equipment here. Everything is on maintenance cycles, so we keep up with things really well in all of our buildings. But it's just at the point now where we can't replace parts on things, so time. We have a really healthy funding stream for our child nutrition program. That program does a fantastic job. So they are able to replace equipment as it's needed. And we're just at the point now. Where we need to replace it.
The motion.
And this is for the question, so it's
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion is passed.
Thanks, Sarah.
Last new business item.
And there's nothing in the packet for that one, so this was a discussion that you and I had about, you wanted to with the board about conference.
Yeah, so most of us are gonna be at the OSB and that convention. It's not national, it's Oregon State in Portland. I was reached out to be a part of a workshop that has to do with sustainability and capital planning. For a lot of that was shared in the LFRP. So just wanted to run that by the board, let people know that I plan to be part of that panel workshop, and please join if you can. And then my meeting will be attending level.
they call it policy institute. And the focus is the workforce development. So I think that is really interesting. And they really provide a lot of that data and research around that. And so I think that would be a lot of connection.
Before we go into executive session, I want to make one quick announcement. That's all right. I did want to thank Rachel Dancy, who's been filling 2 roles for the last couple of months while Jenny is out. Jenny will be returning and she'll be back doing more things. But I wanted to publicly acknowledge the amount of work that Rachel's taken on to do 2 people's job at the same time. And it's already hard enough to referee myself and Juan. But she's done an excellent job of that, and also still doing communications work. So I wanted to publicly acknowledge Rachel for that. That's a lot of extra work to take on, do the board packets and do all that before every event is school, before the executive session. So thank you publicly for doing that and carrying us through and learning lots along the way too.
Absolutely.
Anyway, thank you, Rachel, very much for the work you did.
Thank you.
Did you put our board packet? Can we? I went, put it together like this. Did you make that?
Oh, I mean the flipping up, yeah. You can do that.
It was an accident.
That makes it easy because you can. And we're going to do that.
It'll be moving into executive session.
I'm just gonna stay.
Yes, and. Juan, is that right?
Mm, interesting. You stay. Okay. Ah. I sent it to both again. I sent it both, yeah, I don't know what she's saying.
Okay, we're back from executive session. Next on the agenda are future agenda items. So anything that we need to consider. I have one quick one. So we had our retreat with Vince. Got a chance to talk to him and kind of figure out what's next for the board for development. And it looks like Janet's gonna be working with us for goal setting and more further board development. So we're waiting to hear back from them to set that up. Something to look forward to as we continue to work on board development, and we're gonna have another member join us soon, so it'll be good to include them in that process.
Yeah, and to that effect, I'll be meeting with them, with Janet and Vince tomorrow. And with Juan and myself, and we'll kind of go what that plan looks like, so we can have a better idea. Of the board.
Next up is the board calendar, so we have a work session on October 11th, and we'll have a regular board meeting on the 25th. All right, so finally, we can adjourn. Meeting's adjourned.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks, Laura. You too.